All my life I've chased monsters, but none of them had ever hurt me this deeply. Detective Sarah Reynolds' voice was a broken whisper in the dim emergency veterinary clinic. The blood on her hands had dried to a rusty brown, flaking onto her once shiny badge that now seemed to mock her oath to protect. She leaned over the wounded body of Rex, the large German shepherd lying on the steel examination table beside her, her trembling fingers stroking the dog's thick black and tan fur. Each of Rex's breaths was labored and ragged, blood seeping through the hasty bandages and onto Sarah's palm. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across Rex's powerful frame, now so vulnerable. Sarah's mind raced through the events of the night, the anonymous tip, the abandoned warehouse by the river, the trap they'd walked into. The crack of gunshots still echoed in her ears. "I should have seen it coming," she whispered to Rex, her partner of 5 years. Their record was legendary in the department. 15 major cases solved, countless arrests, and a bond that went beyond the standard K-9 unit training. But tonight, someone had gotten the better of them, and Rex had paid the price, taking a bullet meant for her. The veterinarian worked silently at Rex's side, lips pressed into a grim line as she administered another injection. Sarah barely registered the other officers who had arrived at the clinic, their concerned murmurs forming a background hum she couldn't focus on. All that mattered was Rex's next breath, and the next after that. "Hang on," she begged Rex, tears glistening on her cheeks, carving paths through the grime and blood spatter from their confrontation. "I'm not going to leave you. Not now. Not ever." Though the dog's eyes were narrow and cloudy with pain, they locked onto Sarah's, that unspoken bond between them. Something beyond trust and loyalty, stronger than ever. In those amber eyes, Sarah saw the same determination that had guided them through countless investigations, from drug busts to missing children cases. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and pain. "Who?" Captain Mike Donovan appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grave. He'd been their supervisor for 3 years, always supporting Sarah's unconventional methods and her insistence that Rex be treated as a full detective partner rather than just a tool. Now, he looked as though he'd aged a decade in one night. "Sarah," he said quietly, "forensics found something at the scene. Boot prints, not matching any of our team, and this." He held up an evidence bag containing a distinctive lighter with a scorpion emblem, a calling card that sent ice through Sarah's veins. No one answered her question that rainy night, but the lighter was a message in itself. The scorpion emblem belonged to Marcus Reed, a crime boss whose network Sarah and Rex had been investigating unofficially for months. The department had deemed the case closed due to lack of evidence, but Sarah had persisted, convinced that Reed was behind a string of murders near the River District. Rain lashed against the windows of the clinic as lightning illuminated the parking lot outside. Sarah didn't know then that it was both the darkest night of her life and the beginning of their biggest case ever, one that would reach into the highest levels of power in the city. 6 months earlier, the courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes breathing feel difficult. Every seat was filled, and all eyes were fixed on the woman at the center of it all. Detective Sarah Reynolds sat at the attorney's table, firmly holding the leash of Rex, who was now fully healed, though a slight limp remained as evidence of that terrible night. She looked impressive in her formal uniform, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her posture professional, though those who knew her well could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Rex, a magnificent black and tan German shepherd, stood beside her with a calm but alert manner, his ears occasionally twitching at sounds only he could detect. His training had made him exceptional at scent detection, but over the years, Sarah had noticed something more, an almost uncanny intuition that sometimes seemed to transcend his training. Defense attorney James Foster, a man with sharp features and sharper suits, paced before the bench, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the polished floor. Your Honor, the prosecution's case relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a single witness whose credibility is questionable at best. District Attorney Melissa Chen, whose determined pursuit of justice had earned her both admirers and enemies, leaned forward at her table. The evidence against Mr. Lawrence Foster is substantial, Your Honor. DNA traces, proximity to the crime scene, and motive. Judge Harold Wilson, known for his fairness but strict adherence to procedure, nodded thoughtfully. His 30 years on the bench had given him an almost preternatural ability to sense when something wasn't right in his courtroom. Today, his instincts were on high alert. The case had drawn significant media attention, with journalists filling the back rows, their pens poised over notepads. The river killer had claimed 5 victims over the past year, all found floating in the city's main waterway, each with the same distinctive ligature marks. To everyone else, Rex might have looked like just another police dog, but to Sarah, he was much more. He was her partner, her confidant, and after that terrible night 6 months ago, her life's salvation. During her recovery, it had been Rex's needs that forced her out of bed each morning, Rex's training sessions that rebuilt her strength, and Rex's unwavering loyalty that helped her believe in justice again when the department had all but abandoned the investigation into their attack. Sarah's jaw tightened as Judge Wilson addressed her, reminding her that this might be her final chance to present her evidence. Detective Reynolds, your objection to the prosecution's case has been noted, but without substantive evidence to the contrary, this court must proceed. The police department, under increasing pressure from the mayor's office and media scrutiny, wanted to close the river killer case they had been working on for 6 months. Lawrence Foster, a dock worker with a minor criminal record and connections to all 5 victims, made a convenient suspect. The DNA evidence was fragmentary but present, and the public demanded closure. But Sarah and Rex had a gut certainty that Foster wasn't the right person. There was something too neat about his arrest, too convenient in how the evidence had suddenly materialized after months of dead ends. There was very little solid evidence to prove their suspicions, and the thought alone felt like a betrayal of her oath to uphold justice. Captain Donovan sat in the gallery, his expression unreadable. He'd supported her investigation up to a point, but eventually, departmental pressure had forced him to order her to stand down. Sarah had officially complied while continuing to investigate privately, risking her career in the process. Rex shifted beside her, his ears perking up slightly as he scanned the courtroom. Sarah had learned to trust these subtle signals. Rex sensed something, someone, that warranted attention. Sarah's hands trembled as she held Rex's leash, her voice barely steady. "Your Honor," she began, rising to her feet, her voice filled with raw emotion that she rarely displayed in public. "This isn't about procedure, it's about commitment to justice. The evidence shows that Mr. Foster was somewhere else on the night of the 3rd murder. His work ID card was used to clock out at the docks at 11:42 p.m., while the medical examiner places the time of death between 10:30 and 11:15 p.m. The location is 15 miles from the murder scene. If we blame him, the real killer will remain free to take more victims." She could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom, the judge's calculating gaze, the prosecutor's irritation, the defense attorney's surprise at finding an unexpected ally. In the gallery, families of the victims watched with a mixture of confusion and renewed grief as the certainty they'd been promised wavered. "Detective," DHN interjected, her voice sharp. "That evidence was reviewed and deemed inconclusive. Someone else could have used Mr. Foster's ID card." "And that's exactly my point," Sarah countered. "There are too many possibilities that haven't been explored, too many loose ends. We're rushing to judgment because we need a resolution, not because we've found the truth." The room fell into deep silence, the air thick with unspoken sympathy. Some spectators wiped their eyes, while others exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pity and anger. A journalist in the back row scribbled furiously, while another slipped out, already formulating tomorrow's headline about the detective who couldn't let go. Sarah felt Rex tense beside her, his body becoming alert in a way she recognized from their fieldwork. Something or someone had triggered his training. The judge's face remained neutral, his eyes studying Sarah for a long moment before he leaned forward, preparing to announce his decision. His clerk handed him a sheet of paper, and he adjusted his glasses, the courtroom hanging on his impending words. But before the words could leave his mouth, something unexpected happened. Rex suddenly stood up, pulling the leash free from Sarah's trembling hands with a force she hadn't anticipated. The dog moved toward the judge with purpose, barking sharply, his voice echoing through the courtroom like thunderclaps. The crowd gasped, and the bailiffs stepped forward instinctively, hands moving toward their weapons, though Rex showed no signs of aggression. His barks were insistent and purposeful, as if he were trying to communicate something urgent that only he could perceive. "Rex!" Sarah called, her voice breaking with panic as she moved to follow him. But deep down she knew. She had seen this before. Rex wasn't just barking. He was alerting. The specific pattern of barks that indicated he had detected something significant. The same pattern he used when finding evidence at crime scenes. The judge recoiled slightly, his gavel clutched tightly in his hand. The bailiffs hesitated, torn between protecting the judge and trusting the police dog, whose reputation in the department was legendary. Sarah had spent years teaching everyone that Rex's instincts were to be trusted. Now that trust was being put to the ultimate test. Whispers rose in the courtroom, spreading like wildfire from row to row. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone whispered from the back row. "Is this some kind of stunt?" another voice added. Defense attorney Foster looked bewildered but hopeful. Anything disrupting the proceedings might benefit his client. D.A. Chen stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to disrupt these proceedings. I move that Detective Reynolds and the animal be removed immediately." Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as she watched Rex, trying to interpret his behavior. In 5 years of partnership, she had never seen him react this strongly in a controlled environment like the courtroom. Something was very wrong. Sarah's chest tightened as she stood up, her chair sliding backward with a screech across the polished floor, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "He's not just barking," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He only does this when he detects something specific. He's trying to warn us about something, or someone, in this room." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his hand, his eyes locked on Rex, who had positioned himself between the bench and the gallery, his posture now protective rather than aggressive. The room fell silent again except for the dog's barks echoing like heartbeats against the high ceiling. Whatever Rex sensed was no longer just about Sarah's intuition or her doubts about the case. The dog was reacting to something immediate and present. Captain Donovan stood up in the gallery, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. "Everyone stay calm," he commanded, his authoritative voice cutting through the growing tension. "Detective Reynolds, what exactly is Rex alerting to?" Before Sarah could answer, a commotion at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. At that moment, one of the back doors to the courtroom opened slightly. A figure stood in the hallway, a woman with disheveled brown hair and dark circles under her eyes, her face tense with fear and uncertainty. Rex's attention immediately turned to her, his barking growing more intense, more urgent. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized the woman from photographs in the case file, Eliza Morgan, the girlfriend of the second victim, who had disappeared shortly after his death and was presumed to be either another victim or a fugitive. The woman looked like she hadn't slept in days, her clothes rumpled and her hands shaking visibly even from a distance. Her eyes darted around the courtroom as if searching for someone, widening when they landed on Lawrence Foster, then narrowing as they continued to scan the room. "Wait!" Sarah called out, drawing everyone's attention to the figure at the door. Does anyone know who this woman is? Though she already knew, she wanted to hear the reaction from others in the room, to see who recognized Eliza Morgan and how they responded. As the court officers moved toward the woman, Rex continued to bark like a cornered animal, his attention now divided between the newcomer and someone else in the courtroom. Sarah couldn't yet tell who. The spectators pushed back in their seats, creating distance from the commotion, while journalists leaned forward, sensing a story unfolding before their eyes. The woman entered the room trembling, her eyes filled with fear but also with determination, like someone who had made a difficult decision and was now committed to seeing it through. 2 bailiffs flanked her immediately, but she didn't resist. My name is Eliza Morgan," she said in a shaky voice that gradually strengthened as she spoke. "And there's something you need to know. Mr. Foster was there that night, but he's not the killer. I saw the real killer. I've been hiding because I was afraid they would find me, but I couldn't let an innocent man go to prison." The room erupted into chaos, whispers turning into cries of surprise and confusion. Judge Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. D.A. Chen stood frozen, her carefully constructed case crumbling before her eyes. Defense attorney Foster looked triumphant but cautious. Sarah turned to Rex, whose barking had now stopped. Instead, his eyes were fixed on one of the court officers standing near the judge's bench, a young man with close-cropped hair and a regulation uniform whose face had grown pale, his hand moving slowly toward his hip. Sarah hadn't seen him before today, which was unusual for a regular courthouse officer. The man's eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment, and in that instant, she recognized the cold calculation she had seen in countless criminals, the mental math of someone weighing their options for escape. There was also something familiar about his features, something she'd seen in photographs or surveillance footage during her investigation. The man suddenly moved, reaching for his pocket as his heart raced wildly, his cover blown by the unexpected arrival of the witness he thought he'd silenced months ago. But Rex was faster, 5 years of training and instinct propelling him forward. The dog lunged across the space between them, a blur of black and tan fur, grabbing the officer's arm with precision, his powerful jaws clamping down with enough force to restrain, but not to maim, exactly as he'd been trained. The fake officer cried out in pain and surprise as he was taken down, a concealed pistol clattering from his hand across the courtroom floor. As chaos took over the courtroom, with spectators screaming and pushing toward the exits, Sarah stood up on the attorney's table, raising her voice above the noise. "He's not a real police officer!" she shouted, adrenaline rushing through her veins, making every sense sharper, every movement clearer. "Check his ID and get that weapon secured!" Captain Donovan and 2 other officers Sarah recognized from the precinct had already drawn their weapons, forming a perimeter around the struggling man and Rex, who maintained his hold despite the man's attempts to break free. "Everyone stay down!" Donovan ordered, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. As Rex pinned the officer to the ground, other officers surrounded him, one carefully retrieving the fallen weapon while another checked the man's credentials. "ID's fake," confirmed Officer Rodriguez, holding up the badge. "High quality, but definitely counterfeit." Everyone in the room watched in shock as the mysterious river killer that Sarah and Rex had been investigating for half a year was arrested. He had been right in front of them all along, infiltrating the justice system to monitor the investigation from within and ensure that Lawrence Foster took the fall for his crimes. Judge Wilson ordered the courtroom cleared except for essential personnel, his face ashen but his voice steady. As bailiffs escorted the confused and frightened spectators out, Sarah knelt beside Rex, who had finally released the suspect on her command. "Good boy," she whispered, her hands checking him for any injuries sustained in the struggle. The best partner anyone could ask for. Hours later, the chaos had calmed down. Eliza's statement had been recorded in a secure room with Captain Donovan and D.A. Chen present, and the fake officer, whose real name was Marcus Reed, The same man whose criminal network Sarah had been investigating and whose emblem had been left as a warning the night Rex was shot, had been arrested and processed. The preliminary questioning had revealed connections to 3 of the 5 river murders, with additional evidence pointing to accomplices within the city's infrastructure. Sarah sat in the empty corridors of the courtroom, stroking Rex's head as he lay beside her, both physically and emotionally exhausted. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed, casting long shadows down the marble hallway. Lawrence Foster had been released with apologies from the DA's office, and the real investigation was finally proceeding in the right direction. "You're an amazing detective, you know," she whispered to the dog, her voice filled with pure gratitude and love. "That night when they attacked us, we almost lost each other. But here we are, and now they won't win." Rex responded by looking at her with warm, understanding eyes, as if remembering that terrible night and the long recovery process that followed. The bullet had missed his vital organs by centimeters, and the veterinarian had warned that he might never return to active duty. Yet here he was, still solving cases that human detectives couldn't crack. Now that the murderer had been apprehended, and Reed's connection to at least 3 of the murders had been confirmed, Sarah could finally breathe easier. The weight that had been crushing her chest for months had lifted slightly. Justice would be served, though there were still loose ends to tie up. Reed couldn't have acted entirely alone in an operation this sophisticated. However, she noticed that Rex's attention was still fixed on the empty corridor of the courtroom, his ears tense, his posture alert in the way she had learned to trust implicitly. Something tightened inside Sarah, that familiar knot of intuition that had saved their lives more than once. "What is it, buddy?" she asked carefully, straightening up and scanning the hallway. "What else do you see?" She knew this wasn't just an ending, but a new beginning. Rex had sensed something else, and Sarah had trusted his instincts all her life. Together they walked toward the corridor, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor, knowing vaguely but clearly that something more was about to be revealed. And Rex's instincts had never been wrong. In a corner beyond the reach of security cameras, partially hidden by a large ornamental plant, Eliza was talking to someone else, an older man in an expensive suit that Sarah recognized immediately. Richard Grayson, one of the most powerful prosecutors in the city, whose name had appeared repeatedly in her unofficial investigation, always just at the periphery, never quite connected enough to warrant official scrutiny. The expression on his face wasn't friendly as he leaned close to Eliza, his manicured hand gripping her arm too tightly. As Sarah and Rex listened quietly from the shadows, they realized that the entire operation was just the tip of the iceberg, a vast network of corruption reaching into the highest levels of the justice system. "You just go in, give your statement, and then disappear," said the prosecutor, his voice cold and calculating, unaware of the listeners just meters away. "The other payments will be made as agreed. No one will ever find the connection between Reed and the department. This ends with him." Sarah held Rex's leash tighter, her scars now not just on her body but etched deep in her heart. This case wasn't closed. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time the enemy they faced was much more dangerous, wearing not just a fake police uniform, but the real robes of justice itself. This brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.